All right.
I do have to go, but I do want to say thank you so much for the information. It was just, I really enjoyed the session.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey there, I'm happy to stay in this main room with my camera off and just work on some OE backend bits if that feels good for you.
Yeah, that's fine. It looks like it didn't assign me to a room either, so
Yeah.
I'm also to stay put.
Yeah, and it looks like the rooms are all even except for, oh, actually Simone. We can assign in Simone to room 5. And then that'll even everything out.
Sounds good. How do I assign someone afterwards?
So if you go to the breakout rooms
Mm-hmm.
and you hover over Simone's name, you can do assign to, and it'll give you the option.
Oh, great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great, thanks. Sarah, do you want to kick
Yeah. Hi, friends. I hope you all are well. Happy Tuesday, I think it is. I can't keep track of days, but I think I got that one right. We're so glad that you have joined us this afternoon to learn more about how we created this virtual justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion orientation at UO Portland. We have been really pleased with the results of this orientation and all of our process to get it going, and we thought that it would be a good model to share with other institutions. So let's go ahead and move into our introductions. I am Sarah Kutten. I am the Director of Student Services at UO Portland. I've been at U of O for about 2.5 years now, and I've been an OE member for quite some time, since I was a graduate student doing my master's. So I'm not going to count the number of years that's been. But this is one of my favorite conferences because I just love the energy and the renewal that this space creates for folks. And if this is your first conference, welcome. And if you are returning, we're so glad to have you back. And I know that we wish that we could have joined together in person this year, but I'm grateful for the virtual environment, which has probably allowed more folks to engage in this event than in the past. So that's really quick about me. Sarah Kutten.
And I'm Jessa Waters. I'm an academic advisor with the College of Design at UO Portland. I've been with UO Portland for almost 2 years now, and I actually started as Sarah's student services coordinator. So it was great to move from beyond our supervisor-supervisee relationship to collaborating on a project with our other committee members to get a program running that will serve all students. I've been an OE member, I think this is 2 years now. I think I've just been to the one conference so far. And I really enjoy this space as a space to connect with others. And it's very recharging for me after a year of chaos. It's nice to have a space to connect with others. So. A little bit about our agenda today. We just did introductions. We're going to go over some ground rules for discussion, introduce you to our program and how it all went down, have some times for questions. Then we have some small group discussion questions for you all to reflect on. And then we will come back as a large group and do a large group share out. And then we have some final reflection questions after that. So we will dive in and I will hand it back to Sarah for ground rules.
Absolutely. So Jessa and I were planning for this session to be pretty discussion group heavy because we want to be able to allow folks to talk about how they might be able to implement some of these strategies at their own campuses. And we decided that it would be important to talk about some ground rules for inclusive discussion. And I want to say that I borrowed some of these ground rules from a presentation that somebody gave at the last OE conference. And I need to go back and double check that person's name so I can give them full credit. But we've modified them a little bit at UO Portland as well. But these are the ways that we're hoping that we can all be involved in the discussion. So first of all, we want folks to engage. When we're in the small groups, it is super helpful to have folks turn on their camera if they feel comfortable doing so. And then we also know that some folks would rather write out their thoughts. So feel free to use the chat box throughout the presentation to ask questions or be like, oh yes, snaps, yes, all that kind of stuff. We love that kind of stuff. We are, one of the things that we really try to push at UO Portland is that the goal of our work is growth. We are not expecting perfection from anyone because we are all learning at the same time. And so growth involves kind of pushing ourselves to the edges of our comfort zone to engage in some of this stuff. Stories stay, lessons leave. Again, this is a pretty common group discussion ground rule. It's really around just making sure that you're keeping personal identifier details within your small groups, especially if folks are sharing personal information. But some of those larger takeaways, those lessons learned, can be spread out. Another really important one is that racism and oppression exist. We hope that if you are involved in this session, that this is something that you also agree with. And racism and oppression impact us all in different ways, depending on our identities and positionality, depending on what's going on in the world around us. And so that can heighten our emotions in ways that will make it sometimes difficult to engage in these conversations. But we're hopeful that just knowing that these are real things that are impacting us will continue to push forth. And then the last one is really about making sure that we are creating a reciprocal relationship so folks can engage in the discussion. If you're a talker like me, try to be mindful of that and make sure that you're creating space for other folks to talk. And if you are not a speaker or chatter on the group, I hope that you'll kind of push and be a little bit brave in this session to engage in that way.
Great, thank you. And I would also just like to note that these were the same ground rules we used to spark our discussions with our students.
So meta, love it. All right, so the imperative at UO Portland, we have been doing equity and inclusion work at UO Portland for quite some time. We've had a diversity action plan that we have been working through, but there was something really powerful that changed the way we approached our work after the murder of George Floyd, and not just his loss of life, but just these ongoing assaults on people of color, and our frustration with some of the social perspectives that were starting to take over, right? And so we said, we have got to do something, and we want to make sure that all of our students that are coming in feel that they are welcome and that they belong, and try to create some foundation for our expectations around equity, diversity, and inclusion on our campus. And so one of the action steps we took toward meeting this aim was creating this orientation experience, which we launched just this last fall.
Great. So a little bit about UO Portland. So we are located in downtown Portland, about a mile from the Justice Center and Justice Department, where a lot of the ongoing protests have been happening throughout the summer. We serve between 400 and 500 students each year, primarily graduate students. So we have 8 graduate programs and 2 undergraduate programs that we serve. The undergrads that we serve are final year students, so they're a little bit more advanced in their program than incoming first-year students would be. We piloted this program among all new to UO Portland students, which averaged to be about 300 students. And out of those 300 new to UO Portland students, we had 269 participants in the orientation, which we were really excited about. A little bit about the programs that we have. We serve programs in the College of Design, the College of Business, School of Journalism and Communication, and the College of Law.
And we did not make this a mandatory program. We just said, this is part of orientation and we want folks to be there, and we were able to get buy-in, and students showed up. So we were really pleased with this 269 students that were eager to get involved in this work.
Absolutely. So a little bit about how we got started. So I didn't look back at our exact timeline, but I was thinking about it this morning. We had our first meeting, I think, in late June, early July, and we are on a quarter system, so we were preparing to launch at the end of September. And one of the major steps that we had to start with was getting buy-in and creating a committee. We had some places to start with this because we do have, like Sarah mentioned, we have an equity and Inclusion Committee and Task Force. We also have a Student Life Advisory Committee. So we tapped folks in those committees who are already trying to also brainstorm ways to do this work in their own schools and colleges, and asked them to be a part of it. We also needed to assess our financial needs. We were able to do this program for zero financial dollars, but we do want to acknowledge that there was a lot of sweat equity that went into this, and without the sweat equity of the committee members, it would not have been possible. And then we also needed to think about coordinating technology needs. So if we can think about all the way back to last June or July, we were all still in this limbo of, will we be in person for fall? Will we not? What are the guidelines going on that we need to be aware of? And we decided pretty early on to make this a virtual program, because even if we did see significant changes in the pandemic, not enough to accommodate 269 students in the same space at the same time. And so those were some of the ways we kind of got started in thinking about this committee. So we ended up with folks, representatives from each of the schools who were excited to engage in this work and brought really awesome ideas to the table.
All right, well, I will talk a little bit about the program goals that we started out with. So the first was to create this cross-program orientation experience that was specifically focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion topics. As Jessa said, we've got a ton of different programs and students can often get siloed in their department. So our goal was to make sure that everyone that was coming in was having a common experience. And that is a high impact practice, if folks are familiar with those. Having these common experiences for students are really powerful for their learning and transformational change in a community. The second was around building community, engaging students across programs, right? And so we did that by having them engage in discussions with each other. And there were some really neat things that came out of that, which I'll talk about later. But building community is a big part of my work in the Office of Student Services, because I serve, my unit serves all of our Portland students. And there are times when students have come to me and said, you know, I'm really frustrated because I feel like I'm, you know, the only Black person in my program and I don't know where there's any other students, or only a person with this identity or that identity. And it's like, actually, I try to create opportunities. My unit tries to create opportunities so students can not feel alone by connecting with students across programs. So building community was a big piece. And then finally was to utilize assessment, right? We wanted to have a better sense of students' knowledge and attitudes around equity, diversity, and inclusion work, as well as their confidence engaging in this work, right? And we wanted to be able to use this to inform the resources that we provided, the ongoing education that we were offering, and identify other ways that we could create more of a sense of belonging and empowerment on our campus.
So I'm going to dive into a little bit about the program components and what it actually looked like. So we started with a pre-assignment and assessment, and we'll be sharing the pre-assignment details, and they're actually in that shared resource folder as well. And then that was kind of the homework, the pre-work we asked them to do before really starting the program. And then we had opportunities, 4 different opportunities for discussion groups and a reflection survey. And then based on that reflection survey and then input from our Equity and Inclusion Student Task Force, that informed our winter programming, which Sarah, I think, is wrapping up this week, and kind of what our next steps needed to look like from there so that this work could continue. It's not a one-time checkbox, right? This is ongoing work that needs to be done. And that is a theme that we got a lot of feedback from students about and something that we wanted to carry forward. So our pre-assignment activities, which the committee was like pretty proud of, we put a lot of thought into this. We didn't want this to feel like an extra thing that students had to do as they were possibly like feeling nervous about getting started or in the midst of starting their program. So we decided that we would hold sessions between week 0 and week 1. And again, we had 4 different opportunities for students to engage, because even though we only serve 9 programs, there is rarely a time that 10 programs, that all 10 programs can actually meet at the same time. So our schedules just overlap in such a way that it's nearly impossible. So that's why we had the 4 different opportunities. And we also wanted a variety of different identities and issues for students to engage with, and wanted to acknowledge different learning styles. So what we asked was for students to engage with 2 pieces of media from 2 categories. So they could read something from the race section and watch something from the ability section. We also wanted this to be mostly open access or free resources for students, acknowledging that that could be a barrier. And I believe all of them were, except for the I Am Maris from Netflix. So there was lots of opportunities for students to engage in these different medias. And then when we came together for our discussion groups, which again were these 4-hour-long sessions, we, instead of like just talking about specific media, we talked a lot about the intersectionality of the different media and how oppression is intersectional and how they could see common themes from all of the different resources that they may have read. So we might have had students in our small group discussions that all engaged in different media, but they were still able to come to the table and either share the specifics from their articles or identify how all of the articles still shared in common themes. So in these hour-long virtual discussion sessions via Zoom, we started with facilitator introductions. Like I mentioned, the same ground rules that we did for this conversation today. We also, this was an orientation, so needed to expose our students to the UO Portland EDI resources that were available to them. And then we broke out into the small group discussions, came back for a large group share out, and ended up having an optional extra discussion time / debrief, which we really needed and which students actually utilized. You'll see in our lessons learned, the top thing that we saw was that we needed more time for these discussions and to really like share out and dive deeper into what was happening in the discussions. But this was a pilot and we started where we started.
One thing I want to note about the facilitators was that we invited folks, faculty and staff from the UO Portland campus to be facilitators of these small group discussions. And we provided them with some discussion resources and some pre-questions that they could ask these groups. And so it was another way for students to engage with faculty and staff from across the campus in this. And so that was a really neat part of the program, as we said, you know, here's this opportunity, here's the number of spots we need filled, and people signed up. It was so cool. It was really great.
I'd also like to just add to that it was an amazing professional development opportunity as a staff member. And I imagine a lot of the faculty and staff that participated would feel that way as well. We need more practice having these discussions too. So to have a space to do that was a great opportunity for us.
All right, and so I'm going to quickly go through the results of the program. And what I've done here is I've put our program goals kind of in the white, and then the outcomes that I'm going to discuss in the green area there. So the first was to provide this cross-campus orientation, which we did, which was great. We engaged students from all of these different programs, and they had an amazing time. They said the feedback was very, very, very positive. I had one student that wrote to me and said, I'm going to do the pre-work, but I don't think these discussion sessions are going to be useful for me, so I'm not going to do it. Otherwise, people were very positive. Nobody was asking, well, is this mandatory? Do I have to do this? And we had a lot of discussion early on about, should we like give students a sticker or a certificate or send out like a Grubhub gift card for everybody who participates? And ultimately what we came down to was like, no, this is what we do at UO Portland, right? And so we didn't want to incentivize it this way because this is what we should be doing. We saved a lot of money by making that decision as well. The orientations also helped set the tone for this is what we do at UO Portland. These are the expectations that we have around inclusive dialogue. And then also gave us a chance to share resources, as Jessa said. So talked about the Equity and Inclusion Student Task Force, some of the different programs that we had planned, some of the resources around Title IX, the different resource centers on campus where students could get access to support that was curated for their identities, right? And then also it helped us facilitate transparency. One of the complaints that we often hear from students is that they're like, well, there's nothing happening. Like there's no change. Everything's the same. Like nobody's really doing the work. And this was a way for us to say, actually, we are doing this. We are bringing you all along the way. This is not a one-time thing. We're actually going to meet with you again in the winter. We have all of these touch points throughout the fall. We are not just checking a box here. This is really about changing the structure and the culture of our campus. And so this orientation really did help create some transparency around our work in this specific area. Another piece was to build community, and I'm going to kind of read these backwards, but we were able to introduce participants to each other, so student to student, and then student to facilitators, right? And these became folks that students very early on became comfortable with, who may or may not have been in their program with the facilitators, but somebody that they could go to if they ran into an issue, right? So maybe a student didn't want to come to me because they had a topic that they just, they weren't super comfortable bringing up with me as a person of color, but they could go to a white person or somebody who identifies as LGBT to have more of that safer space right from the get-go. So having those connections and building those right up front, saying you're not alone in this, you belong here, we want you here, was really powerful. The same for students, right? They got to connect with each other as well. And then this orientation launched into a lot of engagement throughout the term, this last term that we had. So we had some BIPOC or like affinity group gatherings. We have the Equity and Inclusion Student Task Force, which was also launched in the fall and has grown quite a bit. And they have a podcast. They're putting together programming for lightning talks. They're hosting more affinity group gatherings, doing some really amazing work that all stemmed from this orientation where we said, hey, we have these things that we want to get going. You want to jump on this? And students did. So that was really exciting. And then finally, our results around assessment were very helpful. We had campus specific data. Our universities are often collecting data, but sometimes it's hard to know where that actually goes and it's hard to get access to it. And so as a satellite campus of the University of Oregon, we really wanted to make sure that we had campus specific data on our students about their attitudes, about their expectations, about the things that they're struggling with, about the way that they're engaging with the media that we shared. And so this allowed us to collect that information. And we use that to inform our programming and our approach for the coming terms. So as Jessa said, we are now in the winter cycle of the orientation. So we've re-invited the students from the fall to continue the conversation. One of the things that came out of our data or our assessment was that students felt really knowledgeable about equity, diversity, and inclusion, but not as confident in terms of interrupting oppression. And so our winter sessions was all about interrupting oppression and kind of strategies for that, discussing the barriers, helping them identify some language to interrupt oppression. And so that was really great. And then it also helped us speed up the change process on our campus. And one of the things that I talked to students about early on was that a lot of times on campuses, we want to do a climate survey before we move forward with things. Well, you spend a year picking a survey, you spend a year collecting your data, you spend a year reviewing it, and then you spend a year re-implementing. Well, the students that first took that survey are gone. And so we tried to shrink this down to a term, which was very ambitious. We recognize that we have a smaller campus than we have about 400 to 500 students on our campus. So we do have that ability to be a bit more agile, but no longer are we going to be waiting until students are gone to address the problems that they're bringing to us right now. And so the assessment, we wanted students to know, like, we hear you, and we are going to work at lightning speed to try to make sure that your experience is better as a result of taking our assessments.
It's also just a powerful way to reiterate to students that we can know what they need to a certain degree as faculty and staff members, but their voices are most powerful in enacting change. And when we use feedback and assessment data, we can often get results a lot more quickly that way because it is directly reflective of the student experience.
And this is me. implications and next steps. And then we're going to open to Q&A. So if you're brainstorming some questions and want to start putting those in the chat, that's great. Or otherwise, feel free to speak them out when we get to that slide. So implications and next step. Overall, we are so proud of this program and how it has rolled out. Our students are excited about it. They're interested in it. And we thought we have to share this at OE because, you know, this is one of the places where we really do get a chance to talk about the work that we do and some of the lessons learned along the way. And so we are super proud. Our assessments showed that our incoming students expressed a strong understanding of themselves and their identities. And we thought that what a great launching point for students, right? To acknowledge that. And just, we shared the results of our data with our students and said, you know, this is where a lot of you are, and this is what we're going to do next. We also shared the data at a faculty retreat and shared with the faculty, you know, here are some things that you can do to help us build on this foundation that our students are coming in with. And often our students are more, are better at this work than we are, right? And so let's create space that allows students to be empowered and help facilitate this change on our campus. It's not about who's in charge of the classroom, right? It's about creating a space that's open for everybody. And so really when I spoke with faculty, it was talking to them about vulnerability, right? So you don't have to have all the answers. We're really cultivating this culture of growth, not perfection. And I'm hopeful that this is what's going to be carried forward. And with that, students were able to be vulnerable in their group discussions with each other. And I think that faculty are also moving in that direction as well, which is really exciting.
So with that, we have some time for Q&A. I'm going to just stop share for a little bit so we can see faces. And we are happy to field any questions that may have come up so far or that you might want to type out in the chat right now.
And it also looks like we have some folks in here that were facilitators for our discussions or were part of the creation of this. So if there's something that you want to add that we may have missed, feel free to come in and share that as well.
Hi. Hi, Sarah. Yes, I was both on the committee and one of the facilitators, and I found it, I think Jessa sort of said, like, it's a great opportunity for me as a staff person. I mean, especially remote, but a lot of times I don't have a lot of opportunities to interact with the students kind of at their intellectual level. They might come to me with issues or whatever, but to actually like work through some problems sort of more classroom style was really fun and neat to meet people from different programs. I think it was a great way to start having some of these conversations.
Thanks for sharing that, Andrea. I can also share that, you know, when we were doing the discussions, it was a really, I mean, it's been a tense time, let's say, for a while, but it was a really tense time. And these conversations, a lot of the facilitators came back and they said, this makes me feel so hopeful. Our students are amazing, as are all of yours. And if given the opportunity to just engage around these topics, it's such a powerful experience.
Hi, Sarah. It's nice to see you. I have a question on, I love, because of my familiarity with UO Portland, like I love that this was able to be implemented. And I also like the small insular community, like I feel like, use your words, made the quickness of it possible. What, if any, plans are there to broaden this to the larger U of O community? And I'm specifically asking because I resonated very much with your comment of a year to do the survey, a year to do the research, because PCC did an entire thing that started 8 years ago and we're beginning implementation right now. So how does the community college that is massive kind of model this quickness that you did and implement that? Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, part of it came from our leadership, right? That was said, we need to do this and let's make it happen, go forth and do it. So we're very fortunate to have an amazing Vice Provost, Jane Gordon, on our campus that is completely in support of this work and just said, this is what we do here now. So this is what we're doing. I have spoken with folks in different, down in Eugene on our main campus, particularly in the School of Business, and then some folks in residence life about piloting it with their students. And so it's really about like kind of start, you don't have to do a full-fledged thing initially. I think being able to show that it works with a pocket of students on your campus and then you can scale out that way might be one pathway to go through. It could be part of a transfer student orientation, right? It could be part of a living learning communities orientation. It could be student leader orientation. Like it's if you can kind of build it in that way, so you can have a model, because you're always going to want to customize for your campus too, right? And so starting small, I mean, this was a big risk for us because like, well, we don't know how this is going to go. We are falling forward. We are expecting growth, not perfection. And so we just did it.
Yeah, and I'll speak to, we made the intentional choice of just new to UO Portland students too, to try to like facilitate more participation, because we know by even winter term of a student's first year, the word mandatory or strongly encouraged doesn't have any more bite to it. And so we made that intentional decision and would look at expanding it to all UO Portland students in the future, especially since since we just piloted with the incoming students, our returning students are going to have gone through this process and finding new ways for them to maybe engage in a similar model next year as well.
Yeah. And most of our students are on our campus for 2 years because most of our programs are graduate programs. So
Just wanted to pause. We have some questions in the chat. Starting with Kimberly, it looks like.
How far in advance did you share your program goals and the ways to engage with students? I think we sent them the resources a month in advance. Jessa, was that right?
Yeah, I think
we wanted to give them plenty of time to engage and also send lots of reminders because we knew that it was the summer or they were just getting ready for graduate school or their new program. And, they had a lot of responsibilities, even just for their individual programs to get prepared. Graduate school orientation always starts way ahead. And you're like, wait a minute. So we gave them the information about a month before. And then as part of, so they read and engaged in the media, then they filled out a Qualtrics survey, which had our assessment questions. We asked them to reflect on the reading podcast or video that they engaged with, and then also had them pick a time for a small group discussion. And so that was kind of how we figured out how many facilitators we were going to need. And of course they were shifting around with that. And then
I think it was about a month ahead of that, we engaged our program directors with the program goals and strongly encouraged them to find ways to either like make it mandatory again, like through, because a lot of our program directors also teach coursework. So maybe offering incentive for students to participate through like the academic coursework, but having them on board and aware that the program was happening was also critical in student participation.
And the next question was, were there facilitators within each discussion group? And yes, there were. We definitely had folks assigned to each group. And then the following question from Alice asks, us to talk a little bit more about how we prepared folks for those discussion groups. And again, we had like a facilitator guide. We sent out an email saying, here would be the responsibilities, who's interested in being involved with this. So they had a handout essentially to prepare. And again, we said, you do not have to be an expert in any of this to be a facilitator of these conversations. We strongly believe that our lived experiences can help us engage in these topics, right? We're getting away from this expert mentality that often keeps us from moving forward. Like I need to do one more workshop, or I don't know the language about this, so I'm not gonna actually, no, we're not doing that anymore. We are going to just come as we are and engage.
Yes, and we also had one training session before, so folks could come share their concerns or questions based on that guide as well.
Forgot about that. We did do a training session, didn't
Yes,
we?
we did.
We did not do one for the winter, but we beefed up our orientation,
Your
the
guide.
facilitator guide a little bit more, and gave them more information about like the schedule and the agenda that we hadn't quite in the first one.
It looks like we've got one final question. If you've had the winter follow-up sessions, what was the engagement like compared to when you launched?
Yeah, so we are 3/4 of the way done with our winter engagement. Of course, there's going to be some attrition because some students are like, this isn't mandatory. They can't make me do it. And so we have, I think we're at like 100 and I think we've had like 70 students who haven't done it yet. And what we're looking at is, have they completed that assessment on Qualtrics, not necessarily counting who's coming to the discussion groups because schedules are so varied. We know that not everybody can get to those, but our goal was really, let's get this data. Let's get folks thinking about these things. And for the winter, we didn't have them do any specific reading, partly because winter came way faster than we expected. And we're like, we need to give students time to be able to do this stuff, and there wasn't time. So we said, we're going to have you answer the same assessment questions that you took in the fall about your attitudes around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and your like confidence and your ability to engage in that work to see if there was any shift between terms. And then they picked a discussion session time, and we have kind of picked up from there when we've done our discussion sessions.
I'll also add that staff kind of lacked capacity making it through fall term and then really needing to take breaks over the winter break when students were there too. So we acknowledge that there were things that we maybe could improve upon for the future, but we're still excited about the engagement and the ongoing opportunities for students.
Yeah. And it was nice. We told students just 3 to 5 minutes of your time. That's all we need to fill out this thing and sign up for a time. So way less than we were asking for before. They seem to like that.
And then we're going to get ready to start breaking out into breakouts, but Michaela just added another question. Could you pass along the free resources you gave to students as options for reading, watching? They are in the resources folder for this session. So they are in there for you to kind of take a look at and click through to see what we chose. And we're
I'll post that link really quick. Sorry about that.
No problem. The questions for the small group discussions are in that resources folder too. Oh, I just sent those just to Sarah, but I'm also pasting them in the chat if folks just want to copy them really quick. I'm going to assign you to breakout sessions now. We'll take about 10 minutes in the breakouts and then, or 10 to 15 in the breakouts, and then come back together, do a large group share out, our final takeaways, and then we'll stick around for more questions if anybody has some after the time is up as well.
Reminder that you cannot access the full meeting chat once you're in a breakout room. So yeah, making sure to copy and paste those questions.
Or check out the resources folder. Okay, creating. Big EDI cultural night event in the spring that I could see being adapted to include more identities and those types of things to maybe be a celebration of EDI work. Expand our audience. So we would like to take this to all UO Portland students instead of just our incoming students. So how we maybe expand the initial series to include those students in a different way. Expand our facilitator pool. Again, for our first session specifically, a lot of that was the facilitators were the people on the committee, and 4 sessions during the first few weeks of school, especially since the bulk of them were advising staff, it got to be a lot for us. So expanding that sweat equity, which I think Sarah was successfully able to do with this winter session and engage more folks across our units and including our research facilities. And then explore those different tracks like we talked about as well. So how can we make this impactful for students who have been doing this work and don't necessarily want to keep just educating their peers in the same thing, but really expand upon their knowledge here. So those are some things we're thinking about moving forward and about adapting. And we are at the time here. So we just had a few final reflection questions for you to think on your own. What other innovative ideas have come up for you that you've had to create out of challenge necessity? What ideas are swirling around for you now, and what do you need to get your ideas off the ground? How can you create capacity to implement something new during these unprecedented times? And for those who would like to stay and continue discussing, Sarah and I have blocked off the next 10 minutes or so on our calendars. But for those of you who have to go, we totally understand and want to be cognizant of time. I just want to thank you all for joining us today, and our contact info is there if you need to reach out to either of us. Sarah, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Nope, just thank you all so much. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be part of this conference. I hope that you continue to learn and grow and are inspired throughout this whole experience. And many thanks to our helpers for this session. So we had Brianna and Shania that were helping get things set up for us. So really appreciate that. We'd love your feedback. Fill out the feedback survey. Those things.
Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording.